First of all, not all carvers do a lot of feathering as such. A lot of them paint. And instead of carving feathers in and doing all this thing, they do it with a paintbrush. And my only example I have around the house that might even come close to that is this. There's no feathers carved in this, but there are a very rustic, primitive maybe, example of painted feathers. But you go down and look at your champion birds, at least the one I've seen in some of the museums down in Maryland, for example, Salisbury, where the National Carvers Museum is, and look at their birds real carefully, you're going to find more painted feathers than carved in feathers and burned and textured with stones or anything else. But I can't paint that way. So the only way I can even come close to having one that looks like what they come up with is put the texture in and let that give you the shadows and everything that makes it look like a real feather. Anyway, I thought I would start out with something that in the few talks I've heard about feathering from different people, they hardly ever touch on. They touch on primaries and they touch on scapulars and things of this sort, but they never really talk much about the head. My personal recommendation is never try to carve tiny little feathers. Now, some people I'm sure would disagree with that. They can do it. I cannot carve those little bitty feathers that start in the head and slowly get a little bit bigger as they go back and make them look decent at all. I've tried it, and it just doesn't work for me. So basically what I've come up with is a variety of ways, and they're not all my original ideas. I don't know whose they were originally, is taking your wood burner or possibly stone and carving certain kinds of lines in. And it kind of depends what you want. If you just want a little texture, you can just take a stone or your wood burner and make some lines, go in the proper directions, of course, always. But if you want them to show as little bitty feathers, you have to do something different with it other than just draw your lines. And I come up, and this is something I scribbled. I don't really know if anybody can see this. I can see it from here. Can you see it out there? There's one up in the corner. They look like little hen's feet or something. 3 lines, basically. And I'll pass one around later, and I burned some on a piece of scrap wood to show you a little bit closer what it looks like. But 3 lines, just, where'd my pen go? Here it goes. Just like this. One straight, one this way, and one this way. Now just imagine they're really like this, those 3 lines, rather than the length I'm drawing there. And you put them real close together. Now, when you paint, if you're using that very watery coats of paint that you should be using, they will show through, and they will look like a little bitty feather. And it's really simple. It's not hard. Mix a little time with your wood burner, make those little bitty lines, but it'll give you that effect without having to carve them in at all. And if you want something to show up a little bit more than these do, well, you take a pencil real lightly, or you can wash the pencil off afterwards if you want, but draw your little feathers in, and usually when you start up with the bill, they're really tiny and they get a little bit bigger as you go back. And then you take your wood burner and make these lines inside your feather, but the secret is you take your wood burner and you push it in way up here, and then you pull it out towards the edge. So it's deeper right through here and thinner as you get out towards the edge. And then when you paint over that, it will really look like a carved feather in there. And the secret is that wood burner, pushing it in and pulling it out.
So what are you doing, drawing your groups?
Yeah, I draw the groups in first. You know, after a while, you probably can do it without it, but if you want to make sure that, first of all, you don't have rows and rows of exact feathers, you know, so you look like a shingled roof.
So they're staggered like
yeah, stagger them, put them a little bit different size. You know, don't put them all like this. You might want to have one like this. You might want one down here and one like this. I don't know.
So you start deeper at the base and then drag it down?
Deeper at the base and drag it towards the edge.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And stop where the other
Well, if you go over the one, if you start this way, going this way, and you go over a little, that's fine. Because what you want the feather to look is one laying over the top of the other.
So normally you would start at the top and like a shingle, come down when you're burning it, or go the other way up?
I usually start at the back, or the back of the head going towards the front. Okay. I mean, you don't have to do it that way, but if you want, if you don't stay in your line and go over, you know, fail kindergarten because you can't stay within the lines, right? The old art lessons, I don't know. Maybe I'm older than you. But anyway, if you go over a little bit, that's all right. But if you go the other way and go over, then it's going to look funny.
Yeah.
It's going to look funny. Okay, and then as you get back farther, and I'm usually talking about the way of the back of the head, the neck of some of your ducks, for example, I still don't try to, even though feathers are quite a bit bigger back there, I still don't try to carve every one in. What I'll do is take a bigger one and then make the bigger one, when I go to burn it, little feathers inside of it. And you can actually carve some in, so you get a little waver and texture and things of this sort, but you still don't have to carve those little bitty feathers. But it works. Anyway, if you don't like to do all that, well, you can just make a lot of lines, but if you want to look soft, to me, or softer maybe is a better word, you don't make just a bunch of straight lines. You have one this way, one this way, one this way, all kind of go in the general direction of the way you want your feather lines to go. You know, birds are very streamlined. If they aren't, when they fly, their feathers will fly up and they wouldn't be able to do anything. This looks softer than just straight lines. I don't know if anybody can see that. This is the 3 lines. This is drawing your feathers in, pushing in, coming out. These are straight lines. These are, looks a little softer if you make some on little angles. And later on, I don't think I'll pass all these birds around. This is a good example of 3 lines in the wood duck, for example. I got some here that are pretty straight, probably not things I'm proud of, but they're all right. And you can say the same thing for your songbirds. The only songbird I have on hand right now is the cardinal, but essentially you can do the same thing to those songbirds that have those little bitty feathers up there if you want to show them. Okay, is there any?
Are you talking about a particular group of feathers, or?
Well, I originally started just talking about the head feathers. Yeah, I did a little bit on a piece of scrap wood, a little bit of time I had last night. Maybe you can see what I'm talking about. I'll pass that around. Of what exactly we're talking about. Yeah, they're pretty tiny. You gotta get those glasses on. And the only thing I say, if you do those, you want to make those lines as close, really close together. You don't want to leave blank spots.
Flat on it.
It'll look flat. It'll look flat and smooth when you paint. If you don't get them really close together.
Make straight lines or curve?
Doesn't matter. Well, those are pretty straight because you only got so much room to curve them in.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So, I mean, you know, you can try to curve them, I guess. It wouldn't hurt.
Yeah.
But, you know, the curve's going to be so slight you probably won't be able to see it anyway. Yeah. The quill's so tiny. I actually do have a quill, but you can't see it. It's so tiny. And I don't know if I'm good enough to draw a picture, but a lot of these feathers are kind of like this. And you get a quill here, but the next feather comes over like this, and you never see it, even on the back and the side pockets and so on. Unless it's really quite a large feather, the quill's pretty much invisible. Your primaries and your tail feathers, I don't know if there's any great secret to those. Basically, they're layered and they come down little steps, basically. And there's all kinds of ways you can do them. If you're using power, you can take a barrel or cylinder type thing, something that has a 90-degree edge on it, and you can run that right along your edge of the feather, and it puts a nice line in there. or if you're using knives, you can make a stop cut, take a chisel or just a knife and peel that piece out. It looks the same. One to me is as easy as the next. Kind of depends whether I'm at home and have all my equipment or at work and carving at work. But I think the secret to those feathers is actually what you do after you get your feathers carved. I'm assuming most of you have carved a bird or two and can carve a tail feather or a primary feather. Sort of like a tail fin, you know. Something like that. Okay. To me, the texturing becomes one thing I don't see a lot of people doing, and I don't always do it, but most feathers, if you really look at them carefully, are rippled. They aren't really smooth. There's little waves in them. And one of the first things I do, and you're going to have to come up here and see it. You can come up here and see some of them. You know, I put some ripples in the feathers, and what I do is take a ball, and you can alternate your size balls. You always want to vary the things you do. And following the hairline, I always draw with a pencil a hairline in it, because if your ripple doesn't go the direction of your hairline, it really looks funny. And put a few ripples in, so it goes a little bit like this. And it creates your shadows and things of that sort. And when I get to the side pockets and things of that, I do a lot more of it. You don't want to overdo these things, because you can make a cartoony if you do too much of a...
Caricature bird.
Yeah, well, that's all right too if that's what you want. But after that, it's the wood burning, to me, that makes some of these look better. And the key is trying to make that feather look soft. And I look at a lot of beginning carvers particularly, and some that are probably carving long enough, they ought to know better maybe, or maybe nobody's ever told them. I don't know. But they draw straight lines, and it looks a little bit like a pine tree twig. You know, straight lines coming out both sides. And to me, if you're doing these feathers, your lines should be what we call an S. They start almost parallel to the quill, curve out a little bit, and then curve again as you get to the edge. And I don't know if all birds are that way. I've looked at some and I never could find the S on them, but they sure look a heck of a lot better if you do it that way. And I don't know if that's improving on Mother Nature, but I think some of your fish look better than any fish I ever saw in the water, for example. And who is it that did the starling from up north? Jerry Warnett. His starling, to me, is about twice as good looking as any starling I ever saw in nature. And, I mean, he took some license and things of this sort, and I think sometimes that's what you got to do here, too. An S on your stiff feathers will make them look soft and much nicer than just what I call pine trees. If you can't do the S, it takes a little practice, really, very honestly, and before you try it, I'd take a piece of scrap wood, draw a feather on there if you want, and try the S curve. If not, just a curve looks a lot better than just a straight line. Anyway, the other thing I see on a number that, you know, very honestly is not correct, some of these tail feathers and primaries, you see a lot of people putting splits in them. And if you find any kind of healthy duck or bird, you're going to find very few, if any, splits in the primaries or the tail feathers. You see birds preening, that's what they're doing, is they're taking all the splits they have out. If they get too many splits in these feathers, they can't fly. These feathers are the ones that have to give them the lift, and if the arrow passes through their feather, no lift. You know, if you want to put one in, fine. If you think it looks better or something of that sort, go ahead and do it. But generally speaking, you're not going to find them that way. They're pretty perfect feathers. Now, if you want to be correct, if you, I don't show my stuff. I don't put them in shows like you do your fish, but they would throw it out practically if you put several splits in your those feathers because it's just not realistic, and they're not going to accept it. Anyway,
such.
I thought he was asking about, you do quills too. I use the same skew for my quill. I just draw the lines in. Then usually, if quills usually stick up a little bit, and I just turn it flat and run along the edge, and that depresses the wood next to it, and you get a quill that stands up on both sides. Works for me. I don't know. Some of these other feathers, these side feathers, ones in the back here, to me probably take more work when you really start thinking about it than the other ones we talked about. And usually if I'm doing a big bird like these, for example, the ducks, I will use power on, but there's nothing I do with power you can't do with just knives if that's what you want to do. Might take you a little longer, possibly, but it can be done. First thing I guess I would say about these feathers back here, and it doesn't matter whether you're doing these or a cardinal or what you're doing, is you got to get those feathers in the right spot. I see a number of birds sometimes, and I look at them, I say, what in the world were they looking at? Because, their groups of feathers are improperly located. What I tend to do is I locate points on them. For example, I will locate the end of this feather right where it's at. And you do that simply, if you're using a pattern, measure from the tail to there. And the thing you also have to remember is you got a flat pattern. Top, most of you have top view also, which is also flat, but you got completely curved surfaces. And your feather on your bird is not going to look like what it does on your pattern. In most cases, it's going to look a lot smaller. And what you see people doing is trying to make the same size feather on their bird as they see in their pattern. But they're forgetting when you look from the side, you're missing this whole top part, or that whole top part is put this big and it's really that big. And if you look from the top, you got the same problem. You're not seeing the full side part of it. You're seeing the top part and the side part. So if you locate it here on your top pattern and locate it down here in your side pattern, even though it's going to look quite a bit different, you can tell approximately how big that feather is. I'm not that particular always about, some people still like to sit there and count the feathers in the pattern and say the other 4 from here to there. If I put 5 in or 6 in and it looks better, fine. I don't get that concerned about it. But once again, I'm only doing decorative pieces. I'm not going for shows. Maybe in shows if a wood duck has X number of tail feathers, maybe they want X number of tail feathers in. But I'm not that concerned about that part of it. So if you're doing it for show, you might want to take that in consideration too. But anyway, once I locate my feathers, then I can start drawing them in individually. Okay, and once you get them in place, well, then you can go ahead and start carving. Now, if I'm using power, the method I usually use is I take a ball, and if it's small feathers up near the neck, I'll take a tinier ball, and as you get back where the feathers get bigger, I use a bigger ball, and go on the outside edge of the feather with the ball and carve it in. And essentially, if you looked at it from the side, what you end up with is a thing that looks like this, or once again, I got a few on here. I'll pass that around too. If you want, you probably can pass that around now. And it makes your bird look like the dickens. Like you look at it after you get all those lines in there and all these trenches in there, like what in the world did I do to my bird? It really looks rough. But then what you have to do, I take a flame shaped, and there's nothing sacred about the flame shaped. If you want to use a different kind of shape, anything that works for you. Then you've got to start smoothing off. I usually take, if this is the front of the bird up here, I usually take this part first and you carve that section off so you get a nice smooth curve from here to the bottom of your trench. And I do that all the way across, all the feathers. Then you turn around and do the other side. So now, instead of, this trench here and a big square here, now you got one smooth curve all the way from here to here. And what you got to be careful is that you get that curve all the way. I see a lot that come up here and they're flat from here to here and then they go down. And that makes a pretty strange looking bird too when you're done, because all those flat spots are going to show. You may not see them before you paint, but as soon as you get the paint on, man, they'll just jump out at you.
Now, do you take a sander after you do that?
That comes next. Then you got to get, if you're using power, you got to sand all your machine marks up. Or if you want to get a real fine stone, sometimes you can do it that way too. A lot of people sand a lot more than I do, very honestly. Maybe I'm not patient enough with sanding, but you're still going to do a lot of work on it after that. But you want to get a machine. If you got a scratch, particularly going across your hairlines, that's going to show. So you got to get those out. Now you can do the same thing instead of if you don't have power and want to use a knife, you can take like a V-tool and you can go all around your feather. And instead of a nice round one now you have a V in here. But once again, then you're going to have to round your V out, just like you would before. Or I suppose you could take a small gouge too, and then you'd have a round shape. And the rule I was always taught is if you take your hand across here and your fingernails catch, you got too much edge. Unless,
Fingernails are too long.
well, if there's nothing there for them to catch on, it doesn't matter how long they're at. I suppose you never have a problem if you bite them all off. Unless you want that feather like ruffled and and up in the air, and then you probably want to undercut it anyway. Well, here you're talking about a different story now, because I do birds with feathers ruffled. They're not always sleek and smooth and things of that sort. Now, somebody asked me about splits. This is where I usually start my splits. So, although maybe before I do the splits, even I'll do the ripples. And I see nothing wrong with these small round feathers in here doing 3 or 4 ripples in them of different shapes, different lengths. Once again, you want everything, nothing exact. There's no pattern to these. You want anything but pattern when you do it. So you might put 3 in one, you might put 1 in another, you might put 6 in another, but don't put them 3 in each and all in the same spot, all the same length, and all that kind of thing. And anyway, do that with a ball, then smooth out that edge. You don't want that sharp edge there. If you're going to put a ripple in, you want a nice, not, like that. Smooth those edges out. And once again, be careful to get them going the direction your hairline is going. And don't go all the way to the quill if you have a quill. Go part way to it, but never up to it. Those feathers get to quills, they're really, really tight, and they don't ripple very much. Okay, then splits. How do you do splits? Well, there's all kinds of ways of splits. I do several kinds of splits in any one bird. First thing I'll do is I'll take my knife and I'll make the bigger ones. And they're usually kind of pie-shaped with curved edges. And, they're fine. These feathers are to protect your other feathers. They're the reeds, if they're going through reeds and things of that sort. Rough them all up. They don't preen them like they do their primaries or tail feathers. And consequently, there's breaks all over them. After I cut them in with a knife, the numbers you want to do that. And once again, don't make them all the same size. Don't put the same number in each one. Skip some. You don't have to have them in every one. Then I make smaller ones. And usually what I do is I take a stone, either inverted cone. Everybody know an inverted cone? They're shaped like a pyramid or something or other, using the edge of them. And depending on how sharp that edge is, you can make real tiny ones all along the edges. Or if you want to take a cylinder, Difference is instead of a 30-degree, say, angle on it, this has got a 90-degree angle on it. You can make some really big cuts with the 90-degree angle. I'd be real careful using that one. And once again, just, you know, if your edges go like this, that's fine. Okay? And then the last ones I do usually is with the wood burner itself. And essentially, as I start to put my cuts in, if I'm just doing it with a wood burner, and I take my wood burner and I burn some a little deeper that didn't come out right. If you put your wood burner in and just leave it that way and turn it this way and then this way, you get a nice little V shape like that, split in the edge. And you know, depending on how long you want to leave it there and how much you want to push either way, you can make even bigger ones. Yeah, the lines themselves. Lots of them I'll stone first, and then I will, after getting the fuzz and things out of it as best I can, I'll take the wood burner over the top of that. I really like the looks better of both in lots of cases, stone and wood burning. You don't have to do both. This one, I brought this one along, not because it's any great piece of work, but this is just stoning. It's real quick. I mean, you can do one like this in an eighth the time. You can go through all the other steps that I went through, and it looks all right. I mean, it's a little primitive if you look at it real close, particularly back from you are, it may not look that bad, but like a lot of my work, the farther you get away, the better it looks. As opposed to this one, where I really took a lot of time, really what stoning I did very, very lightly, and it's mostly wood burning. Let's see, songbirds you can do the same with. The method we're just using, the only thing I did using the ball method is the breast and underbelly. You probably can, maybe you can see it. Then I emphasize a little bit with paint to make them look a little deeper. I don't know if you can see that or not from where you're at. The rest of it is either just wood burned or stone and wood burned both. As such. One example I did, and I broke a feather on this somewhere on the way in. This one is done mostly by knife. I really didn't go through all that. He's got a wing out more than another. He looks like he's, to me, like he's just getting ready to preen or done preening. And I kind of I undercut most of the feathers on the back to make them look a more ruffled look. I wasn't going for that, you can't catch a fingernail on it look. I wanted it rougher. I don't know, anything else? I'm free.